So Ant-Man was directed by Peyton Reed and it stars Paul Rudd, Michael Douglas, Evangeline Lilly, Michael Pena, Corey Stoll, Bobby Cannavale, and it's about Scott Lang. He's a criminal who just got out of prison recently, and when Hank Pym, played by Michael Douglas, finds him and says, "Hey, I need you for a job. I need you to help steal something from me." He becomes Ant-Man, and now he has to pass the torch to Scott and become Ant-Man now. So this was a movie I remember being really excited for when I first heard about it, mainly because of the involvement of Edgar Wright. Edgar Wright was working on this project for like a decade, and then he was about to do this movie for the MCU, and then right before production started, he dropped out due to creative differences, and I was concerned because Edgar Wright is one of my favorite directors, and to see him leave such a property that he'd been working on for almost a decade, it was upsetting. And then they replaced him with Peyton Reed, who directed movies such as Bring It On and Yes Man. It just didn't seem like the right move, in my opinion. So I was very skeptical. I admittedly didn't see this movie right away when it came out. I waited like a week or so. And so when I saw this movie, I remember being blown away by it. And even now, I still really enjoy this movie. So what do I like about this movie? Well, Paul Rudd. Paul Rudd is incredibly likable in this movie. I think he's really funny. He's very sweet. And I don't know if I can really see the criminal side of him, but I do see the smart aspect of him being a criminal. It's like he's kind of like MacGyver, like when he tries to open the safe and tries to like freeze the door and such, like in Titanic. It was like, that was really good. I thought that was really funny. Michael Douglas also does a really good job. Evangeline Lilly, she does a really good job. Corey Stoll in this movie, he gets a lot of flack because he's another generic Marvel villain and that he's very one note. Honestly, yeah, I do agree with that. But I also feel that Corey Stoll at least tries to give his character a little bit more. I think he's at least trying to have fun with his performance. He's chewing the scenery for the most part for a role that could have been an easily forgettable villain. I think he does a good job with it. And Michael Pena, I thought he did a really good job too as Scott's best friend. And his stories are really funny. One of the highlights of the movie when he's like going back and forth, when he's going on sidetracks on during his stories, that was really funny as well. And yeah, this movie is pretty funny overall. I did laugh quite a bit. I laugh more in this movie than I do in most Marvel movies, and I think it's more of a comedy first, like a superhero movie second. And I think that works for this movie. And even though Edgar Wright is not directing this movie and his screenplay is mostly used and he's still on board as like an executive producer, I believe, you can definitely tell that there's still Edgar Wright's style in there. Like the quick cuts, the editing, the action, the comedy. It still feels like an Edgar Wright movie in a weird way, even though it's clearly not him behind the camera. It still works. And I feel like a lot of the fights in this movie are pretty fun, particularly like the Thomas the Tank Engine fight. That was really funny. I'm glad it didn't spoil that in the trailer. The final fight between uh, Paul Rudd and Corey Stoll, that I thought was really fun, and also the fight between Paul Rudd and Anthony Mackie in this movie, that was really funny. And I do like the redemption arcs in this movie because Paul Rudd, he's getting out of prison, he's trying to be a good person, trying to prove to his family that he's actually a really good person, and he does so by saving the days, helping save his family in a way. And also Michael Douglas is trying to have a redemption arc because clearly he is not having a good relationship with his daughter, played by Evangeline Lilly. It does work overall, and I do like that. I do like that arc throughout the entire movie. And some of the practical effects do work for the most part. Like mainly in the fight scenes, they do work when they're not relying on CGI. They're really good as well. And it feels smaller, but it definitely feels bigger in the long run. A lot of people complain about Ant-Man. It's like, oh, it's not really part of the MCU. Well, it is, but not in the way that you really think about it. So, what don't I really like about this movie? Well, there are a ton of references to the MCU, which, yeah, it's an MCU movie, but they feel more forced in than most other Marvel movies, I feel like. Like, they mention, when Hank Pym's telling Scott about the whole mission, Scott's like, why don't you just call the Avengers? Or when there's this whole sequence where they go to Avengers headquarters, and that's when, the Falcon fight takes place. Fun fights, but really doesn't add much to the story other than just to say, hey, we're in the MCU, and he'll be in Civil War later on. And even though I did praise some of the visuals, I praised more of the practical effects than anything. Some of the CGI does not really work in retrospect. Like, there's a lot of stuff in the foreground that just does not look great. Like when Scott's trying on the Ant-Man suit for the first time, it doesn't look great. It looks very CGI heavy, and it looks way too obvious that it's CGI. Like the bathtub scene, that looks so CGI, it's kind of ridiculous. When he's encountering that rat, that looks very CGI-ish. The CGI mainly works when it's not, not in your face, when it's not not in the foreground. When it's in the background, it works. I feel like maybe because we're like with the ants, it kind of works, but it's not because it's in the foreground. It's actually in the background. So that's when it works. And also, the romance between Scott and Hope was incredibly forced. I did not think we needed that in the movie, and it just kind of comes out of, I don't want to say it comes out of nowhere, but it just seems incredibly forced in this movie. It didn't need it. So you could have built up a little bit more of it in Ant-Man and the Wasp, but here, it just kind of feels just thrown in there just for the sake of having a romance when we're already kind of dealing with a lot. So Ant-Man was a movie that I was really worried about going into, but I had a blast with. The performances are great. It's really funny. It does have Edgar Wright's style in it enough, and there are fun fights. Some of the CGI is really good, and it does have good messages in this movie, but I just wish some of the CGI was a little bit better, and I also just wish that the romance wasn't as forced, and also the whole references to MCU, which is kind of the reason why Edgar Wright stepped away from the first place. I wish they were not as in your face, and I felt like because of those references kind of distracted from the story, but overall, Ant-Man is an enjoyable movie overall. I would give Ant-Man 3 out of 4 stars. See it. So, what did you think of Ant-Man, and are you excited for Ant-Man the Wasp: Quantumania? Comment down below, subscribe to the channel. This is Pat. Stay safe.